what I'm going to present is a introduction that I do. There's a lot of history in it. I'll go from the beginning, just like everyone else. We start with the treaty. You guys want these new maps, good looking maps, you're gonna have to come talk to me. So, we all start with the history and the treaty. And I always link it to Dr. O talks about the traditional knowledge that the tribe, their ancestors possessed to be able to live on the land and be sustainable. We knew what we were doing. You hear him talk about that all the time when he speaks. And in this territory, and the treaties have been talked about through most presentations, so I won't hit on too hard, but I did add the Minnesota Crow Wind, and it's red because it was in 1832, or 1848, excuse me. And that's where the tribe would have ended up without Chief Oshkosh. His vision, his leadership, thinking about our traditional ecological knowledge that we had on our own landscape. And knowing all of that, he did venture over there from the history of it and did take a look and knew that was not going to be in the best interest of our tribe. So we owe a lot, if not everything, to Chief Oshkosh. Satellite image has gone around the block here too today. Satellite image, and it is a little bit of an overview for people that are not familiar with the resource or management. So it is impressive when you look at what we have. You can see where our management, you can see some of the management we've done. You can see the natural disturbance tornado from 2007 still shows a little bit in the northwest corner. You can see Anigo stands out. So I do have a slide later that shows, I was asked earlier about wind storms. You can see how we sit, being a forested island surrounded by ag. We do take a lot of wind events and we'll learn that from the history of our resource as well. We can see where there was wind events and fire and current stands that we're managing today. Just another view of it. I think it's a little, as the snow melt from the south, you can see the tornado scars also in there. So just a winter view of it. And I think this slide, don't have to say too much about it. I mean, we were talking about Chief Oshkosh at the conference, the importance, everything right there that is based in our management. It's ingrained in our staff. It's how we manage the land. It's how Chief Oshkosh envisioned that we manage our land. So I talked to my staff about being in the life of a tree. We're not even a few rings of that whole process. The decisions we're making today, what I showed on a field trip yesterday, was 30 years of forest management. That's the people that did that prescription and treatment they're not even working anymore. So it's just what we're going to continue to do. We're not going to see the results of a lot of our decisions in our forest management. What we're doing today, we're not going to see the end result, obviously, but that's how he wanted it to be. We're just managing, and we're continuing the tradition as we continue to manage for his vision. Lots of colors, lots of diversity. So I throw these maps in because of that's our forest cover type map for the forest. And it shows if you can see on the bottom, it shows the different cover types. And you can see the amount of diversity we have to manage, the amount of of options that we can have to manage different species of trees, different types of management. And again, we're just managing it. In your career of working, it's only a little bit of time and effort that's put in. Whenever I put the slide up, this is asked every time, but that was covered well today, so I'm going to address that. You can see the impacts of termination. They stand out pretty clearly on this map. The tornado of 2007 changed that whole landscape out there. This is a forest habitat. For the non-foresters in the room, forest habitat types use plants to help us identify where the trees would grow the best. And Jeff, Jeff was always, I worked with Jeff a long time. Jeff Greeno was mentioned this morning. We grew up working at MTE Forestry together a lot of years. We found a lot of sites together. We protected a lot of sites together. And we'd often talk about forest habitat, why these plants are growing. Jeff went on a whole other level with the plants beyond what we initially began talking about in the early years. But looking at this map, it was a massive amount. It was 810 plots we put in to get this map made. And it's just a snapshot of our plants. So we look at the plants, we look at the habitat, we look at, so each one of these is a symbiotic relationship. There's a plant and a tree in the identification of the habitat. So we use that to tell us where the trees are going to grow the best. Not the soil, soil's part of it, but so our foresters are not only looking up, they're looking at the on the ground at the plants. It's an important part, that ecological connection, that our ancestors understood that quite well. And I'm glad it's applied in a scientific. John Kotar, ring a bell to anyone? John Kotar came here and developed this in the early mid-80s, along with the foresters and tribe. Just a couple pictures, feel good. So I put this slide up the other day, and the only question on it was, what kind of camera, or what kind of phone do you have? So it must be a pretty nice picture. But it just shows, these are the early spring ephemerals. They're the first ones. It's like when the forest comes back to life in spring. This is what you're seeing. So we really like to be out there that time of year. You can see the trees aren't leafed out. These plants are first. We get a lot of sunlight because there's no leaves, and they come up early. So, and we're managing the forest for not just for timber production, not just for, we're managing the forest for everything. When we look at it, we got the plants, we got the tribal members that are out gathering, hunting. That's all considered when we're making a decision. Because like I said, when we make a decision, that decision has impacts beyond just what we want to do with that little acreage that we're managing. Those impacts are going to go way beyond that. And the staff needs to realize that. Like I said, we try and ingrain that into our decision making. What impacts are we going to have when we do this? So another nice map. And I put this in to show that we have a harvest plan. We're cutting on a harvest plan, and each one of those 11,000 stands that we have out there has a year attached to it when it should be cut, or looked at to be cut, or initially stand examined to be considered. And you can see the diversity again. The big blocks of timber up here are kind of similar. They're put on a bigger, more acreage, but each individual stand, these are individual stands that you're seeing down here. and they have a logging year or a year when we're going to go and look at them. And then foresters will go and look. They'll take their data and they'll bring it back, and we'll look and see if that can be treated, if it's ready. Go back to the tornado that hit in 2007, so that reset this whole strip here. And the next time we're going to go look at it is probably 2036, 2045. We'll be back in there taking a look. So all of these, once a stand is cut, it's usually left for 15 to 18 years, and then the cycle starts back over. And here's that kind of how it works. So this is like a 2-year process. From initial stand exam, initial data, to getting cut. This takes 2 years. Prescriptions are written based on, you know, our on data that we collect. And before it gets to this stage, Dave's here, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Wildlife, Environmental Services Department. Everything is cleared, make sure everybody knows where we're at, what we're doing, what we're going to do in there. And then we can go ahead and treat it. It's cruised, it gets cut, harvested. Once we close it out, and then it goes back up here, and that could be 15 to 20, maybe 40 years sometimes before we'll go back and look at it. So it's a continual cycle of planning, harvesting. I talked a little bit about the markets. They're really not any good. They're changing. Everything's changing. The use for wood is changing. The pulp markets are slumping, going away. We need to find alternative uses. And, you know, I mentioned it earlier about how we're going to have to start looking around and getting back to what we did in the past. So my departments quickly have inventory, have silviculture, have harvest preparations to get the timber ready, have admin staff for harvesting. Forest health is a big one. With everything that's going on, all the invasives we have, fire suppression and fuels. Fire suppression, those guys are staffing today. There was a fire, it's fire season again. We've got it's been a while since we had rain, so those guys are working, which is going to open up possibly some prescribed fire, which I'll talk about. There's my staff. 200,000 acres of forest, and that's what I got. I don't want to cry to you guys, but it's not enough. So back 20 years ago, there was 40 people working in these very same positions. They all had bigger, obviously more boxes below them and more people, but that's what we're operating with right now. And all of those foresters are very well trained, diversity, they're doing everything. So seasonally as work comes busy, if it's fire, if it's inventory, if it's whatever we're doing, we move around and help throughout that, but that's not nearly enough people to be managing a forest of this size. So if anyone wants to come work, let me know. Silviculture, I always put a little disclaimer up there what it is. These are the types of prescriptions we use most often. Uneven age, which is single tree group. Even age, shelterwood. You guys were on a tour yesterday, saw a couple shelterwood systems. We do, I don't like put clear cut in even age management. And then we do convert some acres. We're not converting nearly as much as we used to. We're going to just natural regen. Or we're putting fire in behind these even age managements, keep it open. And fire. It's touchy. Just some real basic pictures of what we're talking about. So the single tree select part of it is what we do. You know, we individually, so this is on a 15 to 20 year rotation. We'll go in, we'll thin it out, we'll look at the trees, we'll pick out, in our model, we leave the higher value trees in the stand, and then we'll thin out various trees to give the trees or residual trees we leave more room to grow. So we leave the quality trees in the stand and they put on more growth, put on more wood. And that's the model, that's a sustainability model. That's how, like, Chief Oshkosh's quote is applied into this model. Is we don't go from east to west. We just go every 15 to 20 years and do a thin, select thin. And if we keep doing that, we'll just keep, the sustainability model stay in place. Just a picture of a marked sugar maple stand in northern hardwood. Without going out and looking, you can kind of see the diversity, the size class differences. You got your large saw, you got your small saw, you got your pole timber, you have your younger seedling and sapling trees replacing. So as you can see, it's ready to be marked in a lot of shade. And again, that'll open that back up with the thin, and all the trees that are left there will fill in the crown space, put on more wood, and then about 7 to 8 years, it'll be completely shaded back again. The trees will take all of that crown space up. Who was on the tour yesterday? Okay, this is what we talked about when we drove in. There was a shelterwood, a pine shelterwood. So we're talking about mature 180-year-old white pine trees. We could just leave them there and just thin them over on that same schedule, and it would probably convert back to a hardwood stand over time. Because white pine needs sunlight, they need a lot of sunlight to grow. And it always puts us in a management decision where if we do go with this type of management, it's going to be 30 years. It's going to be 30 years that we're going to be managing that block of wood pretty intensely. It's expensive to maintain pine on those sites. The one thing that we were not using a lot was fire. Fire was the very reason these stands are there now. Whatever occurred 200, 300, 400 years ago, perpetuate pine on the stand was fire. Disturbance, our ancestors burning, all those things were there, that's why the pine's there. In the Western model is shelterwood. Thin it down, prep it, cut it, let it seed back in, let the little young trees start to grow, give it more sunlight, and then you're good. But like I said, that's 30 years right there. Or we could put fire back in, which is what we're doing now. We're doing more of that. That's an area that we burned 3-4 times. A pine stand that we burned 4 times. See the charred stump? That wasn't a prop. It's actually a charred stump. We didn't drag it in there for a picture. But that is the look that our ancestors had when they were burning. When they were burning for berries, berry production, keeping areas open, they didn't care too much about the timber. They wanted it to look like this, where they're sustaining the tribe. So there's no hardwood regeneration, there's no competition. So the goal here is these are seed trees. You can see how it looked in the background. That's how the stand looked. And whoever's on the field trip yesterday, this is where we drove through before we got we took a turn to the right. But this is how it looks. These are seed trees. If you keep it open down here with fire intervals about 3 years, you can get, once you get a good seed, a pine cone crop, it'll seed back in. The thing with this one is the tribal members are using it quite heavily for berry gathering. Each time I went in there this fall, there was a truck, during berry season, there was a truck or car parked in here and they were gathering. And that made me feel good because that was part of the objectives in the plan. It's a Western science application, so I heard Dr. O talk about it before. He talked about the traditional knowledge that you've gained with using fire. but you're trying to apply it to the Western science of growing trees and regenerating trees. So that's where it mixed in there. We're holding it with fire, waiting for a seed crop to regenerate white pine, but the tribal members are in there gathering. That's a win-win for us. Maybe we won't ever, maybe if it stays that way, maybe we won't grow trees in there. Maybe we'll just let it be like that. You can see we got enough pine back behind it. So those are decisions down the road, but again, our job, and as managers right now, are to leave them options on the table for future managers. That's the way I view what we're doing. Even age, we do some even age management. Aspen mainly, we'll cut it. But the oak stand and the pine stand we were in yesterday was also even age management. Those trees all grew up. They're about 160 to 180-year-old trees we were seeing yesterday. And then they need to be rotated or regenerated at a certain point. Usually around that age, you gotta make a decision on them. We do convert some stuff. Again, we're doing less of these. Plantations, white pine trees growing in rows, never really liked it. You know, I didn't think that was, especially with the markets, the way they're going. You know, the fiber doesn't seem to be in much demand right now. I don't know how it'll be in 30 years, but we're gonna do less. So if we're gonna open something up, now we just put it in the burn schedule and they just keep burning it until we decide, or we just keep it open. So, and the tribal members can go in there and gather. Talk about climate all the time. I get the climate question weekly, monthly. What are you guys doing on your forest? And what are you doing about climate change? Well, it's kind of doing it for us. Those are the wind events that were documented in what we could find in our archives at Forestry in the center. As you can see, I mentioned it earlier, when you have that type of block of timber standing in a complete area of agriculture surrounding you, you get a lot of wind. Yeah?
On the 1905, on the left-hand side, and then the 1937, were those like those Jerichos or those downbursts? Or?
Yeah, those were straight lines. So you bring up to 1905 wind event. Can you guys, everyone can see that? That's the green. That event actually created the sawmill in the open. Before that, logging was all river logging down the Wolf. And there's a sawmill at Kashina Falls. The 1905 below windstorm, the tribe wanted to gather that wood and salvage it and be profitable and collect it from the site. And that's why the sawmill went up in the open here. And the sawmill started in 1908, so completely tied to this wind event that we have. We had another one this year. Is it on here? Yeah, 2024. Right here. Kind of started in here and it came through the southeast part of the reservation. 2000, well, you can see by the dates, you see how more frequent they're becoming just by looking at the dates over here. So
those large blocks like the 2022 and that, those are the 1937, those are all straight line winds.
Correct, those are straight line. 2017, 2022. You can see the narrow, you can see the tornadoes are narrower, more impactful. This was 40 million feet of timber right here that went down from this storm. I don't know what the 84 tornado was, but yeah, these narrower, smaller bands are tornadoes, and these other ones are more straight line wind events. I'm going to talk a little bit more about fire, and I think it's important. I think it's something that we've been burning. There's several things that have big impacts on fire. Reservation was one. And the more I did these presentations, another big impactful was termination. There was no fire. There was no cultural burning. Every fire, well, John put them all out. Every fire that was started when we weren't terminated was, you know, it was protection, fire protection, not cultural burning. It had a big impact. We didn't put cultural fire, prescribed or cultural use of fire back until the early 1990s. That's nearly 120-year absence from when our ancestors were burning frequently for those reasons, and it was gone. Took it right off the landscape. So we're burning, and these are the types of burns, fires that we're doing. Wildlife fuels reduction prescribed for prairie site prep, hardwood reduction. That's a picture of us burning on the forest. I like this picture. I should put credit to Wisconsin DNR because they thought they had a live one going over there, and we were just burning. But we're just backing a fire through in heavy wind. You can see the wind, the smoke is getting knocked down pretty good. And then we're just back. So this is backing through here into the wind at a slow rate. So I like this picture because I think, go ahead, Dave. Where's that? That is compartment 114. It would be north of Jackson Creek, between Jackson Creek and South Branch, on the east side of the res. But I think these are the type of fires that were burning quite frequently pre-settlement. Pre any European contact, these were the type of fires, and this is the type of landscape you saw. That was open, more susceptible to fire, more fire was burning. So that's, yes?
With your limited numbers, Ron, is it every man out on the fire?
Pretty much, when it's burn season, yeah. Whoever has fire calls, and we have to be qualified under the federal system. Take a physical, get your qualifications, if you're burned, whatever. Yeah, so during this time of year, April, well, it's getting end of March to mid-May, everyone that has a qual or is able to burn is out there helping us burn. A little bit of fire history. General Land, GLO, General Land Office, was surveying the state of Wisconsin before it was even Wisconsin, 1832, 1866. So Professor Dave Malatnoff, anyone? That's his map. So he took all the, I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, this veg map? Yeah. So basically took all of the points, whenever they would get a veg point or a corner, they would know what the timber type was, or tree, or veg. So you can see the northern hardwood block, the red is jack pine, this is all prairie, the white. So again, it's a valuable tool for us to know what Wisconsin looked like. Wisconsin looked like pre-settlement. There's the notes, they're available online. If you look around, you can find them. But this one is actually from our reservation, township and range, 29 north, 16 east. The notes are from 1845, so we know where this is on the res, and we can go out there and look at it now and learn. Because we know this was burnt, this is a white pine on a 24-inch white pine, and then it entered burnt lands, and then it leaves burnt lands. And everything, all the notes are in there, so, you know, if we want to learn and want to know what our ancestors were doing, we can go look at 130 years of fire suppression. Bill had kind of this version as well. You can take that land office survey layer and you can put it in GIS, you can make your own map of your own resource. So everyone that was on a field trip yesterday in 1832 in the survey, that was brush. There's nothing but brush over there. Or at least that's what it was typed. So, and we learned that this was heavily burned, blueberry production was high, there was a lot more open type look that we had, like the slide I had earlier. Set them on the table, Vinny. Thank you. Yeah, so the brush, we'll focus on that area. So that's where we were yesterday. We left on tour, just for your notes, we left the casino, or the historic president went up the road and we came down in here. But this gives us also, I like to show on this slide, and this is 1914. So we go from 1830s, 1860s to 1914. And you can see where we were kind of switches to young pine. So it was brush. It looked like brush, but there was pine trees growing in there. And that was all disturbance-based, burning. And one thing with this map, we did change it yesterday, GIS, I don't know if you guys, when Caleb was in here. We put the original lakes of Legend Lake on here. We don't have Legend Lake. As it sits today, we put the old ones on. So these are the original lakes as it sat. But I'll use this slide to show why Chief Oshkosh wanted us to be here. Why he thought it was important for our traditional knowledge to be where we are today. Because if you read the history, it was kind of put the Menominees in this wilderness piece of land until we can get them up to that block in Minnesota that I showed earlier. Just kind of hold them there and we'll figure it out. Type of approach. They weren't good farmers. Weren't built. They didn't know how to farm. It's not good ag land. Keep them there. But everything, there's rice. This was all burned. This was big amounts of blueberry production. Berry production was on the east side, heavy. You had your rice in these lakes. You had the Wolf River. You had sturgeon coming to Kashina Falls. You had maple syrup gathering blocks of big northern hardwood maple areas. So everything he knew, the pieces were all here for us to still continue and be sustainable. Moving to Minnesota between two warring tribes wasn't really a good idea or an option for Chief Oshkosh. He didn't want to do that. So, and then we owe it to him. It's ingrained into the staff. It's everyone that works in our department understands that. What Chief Oshkosh did and why we're here today. Yeah, we always respect that. I gotta give these to Doug. So that's Legend Lake today. These are fresh maps. We made them yesterday. When we looked at this presentation, it's like we need to add a few things. So that's Legend Lake today. That's 1938 Legend Lake with our original lakes. The 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's an 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're all, that's that, and then the landscape. When I looked at this picture, I was like, that's all open. That's all being burned. That was all open. Now it's all pin oak, scattered white pine. So when we're talking about termination, that whole entire area is off limits, but that was a high production area for burning, high production area for historic, archaeological significance in and around here. The roads are all on there, and all of these are roads that lead up. So it's heavily impacted and out anymore, but that's all wide open. You can see there's no trees. That was all burned and burned for generations and hundreds of years. Pretty powerful map. And then we did the hydrology comparison in GIS. So we took The green, dark green lakes are the original lakes, and the light blue is currently what Legend Lake is. So we can see all of that, what Doug was talking about this morning, all of these channels, all of this surface lake shoreline that was created to jam as many properties in there as it possibly could. But I think it's a cool map. You can see the original hydrology, see the original where these creeks actually used to run through all of these lakes and out into the Chocolate Lake. So heavily big impacts to the tribe. And these lakes went to the Wolf River, and then this whole thing was so badly damaged. I think that just rerouted. Like Doug said, the creeks are still there, but they're under the lakes right now. Same slide Bill had. He asked about these. These are actually compartments in trees having problems with Penn State getting our data, or getting our cookies back. We call them cookies, where they cut all the trees and looked at the fire scars. They don't want to give them back, which is disappointing. But it just shows the amount of fire. Bill talked about it earlier. These are all fire scars. These are all individual trees with fire scars. You can just kind of see where fire was taken off the landscape. And Doug talked about trauma, informed care and trauma. When I talk about the resource in the land, there's ecological trauma that occurred as well when you're taking fire away like that. I have my fire guys. I can't imagine not being able to burn. I mean, I can't imagine being told that you guys can't use fire anymore. That's pretty powerful things that occurred. Because if the weather's not right, if the wind is wrong, and we tell our guys for one day at work that they can't burn, we should see them powder on. Just one day. So I can't imagine taking that away. I can't imagine where people felt everything, and they were so good at it. They understood it. They knew where to burn. They knew when to burn. The frequency for best berry production was all understood. They were ecologists. We call them ecologists today. They wore all those hats. They knew exactly where to burn and what to do. So, because this is what's occurring on our, it's called vesification. So pre-settlement, we had open conditions, mid-1900s, fire suppression, canopy closure, increased shade. Basically takes a fire-dependent, fire-frequency landscape, and it removes it, and it becomes less fire-prone. So you're more shaded, you got more maples, you got more trees growing in there, which is great for a fire suppression standpoint, but it's not good for, ecologically what we want to do up there. So decreased flammability, the mesophytic layer, and the cool microclimates. So what we're doing is we're taking it back to this and burning it there. Not huge blocks, but enough to make an impact out in that southeast corner. Here's what happens to a pine stand if you don't manage for pine. If you don't do the shelterwood system, if there's no... I guess we're done.
I was getting a break. Battery die? It's been on battery all day.
Rob, while he's doing that, I have a quick question. When you talk about mesofication,
Yep.
that's the right word. When it gets to be that point where you can't burn anymore, if you get a real severe drought, could it burn and then just be really severe, and then you basically destroy the forest?
If we don't get in those types, we won't get the catastrophic stand changing fires. I don't think it's possible.
Okay.
Because of we're talking 10, 12, 16-inch red maple growing in there. I don't, initially it might kill a few, but I don't think you could sustain a run through there to change the stand over completely. So back to this, if there's no disturbance, if there's no wind, if there's no shelterwood type management, pine management, this stand today, this is probably in the early 1900s, where we had this pine stand that was this is the oldest pine that we can find in this stand on the forest. But you can see, if you don't do any type of pine management, or there's no disturbance to open up, it's just gonna slowly convert, the pine are gonna die, and it's gonna convert back to a hardwood stand. That's an easy way to manage, but you're not gonna have pine. You're taking a pine stand and converting it to a northern hardwood stand. Do we want to grow pine there? Those are management type things we have to decide. When we talk about even age management, and we get concerns about clear cutting or cutting trees down for certain management decisions that we make, this is South Branch. This is Coney M East off of 55 around 1900. So I kind of tell the members that are concerned, there were no trees. There really were no trees to start with because we were burning culture. The trees only grew in since fire suppression. And that's what we have up there. So this is South Branch looking east. It looks pretty good to me. Prairie grasses and open areas. How much of this do we want to bring back? We don't, not our decision really, but we're going to offer, it'll be an option for us moving forward to have larger blocks of this available moving forward. Same picture that Bill had with the farm, just a couple of old ones, but this this picture is really powerful. This one really changed for me looking at it when we found it. It is in the Hoffman book that Dr. Overstreet mentioned earlier. It's in the Hoffman book. I looked at several things. Initially, when I first looked at the picture, the first thing I did was look over ancestors, over their camp, and look back at the trees and the spacing of the trees and the vegetation growing under the trees. They're basically camped right in the middle of a big berry patch, and they're gathering, and they are doing it as a family, as we did all of our things as a family back, and still do today. But if you go back to the picture that I showed earlier, where we had burned, and we wanted to hold that for white pine, it's similar. It looks similar, because there's no hardwood growing in here. There's no brush competition growing in there. Again, they knew what they were doing. They knew where to burn. And they had this probably over, I don't know how many years to get it. You kind of see some of the charred trees. So they were putting fire down in here quite frequently on a rotation when blackberries are usually like 3 years. So if you burn it, so they had to have a rotation of areas that they were gathering and using fire. That's after looking and doing our own burning and monitoring, that's what we've learned over the years. I end with that slide, so thank you for your time.
A couple questions.
What are the total number of lakes on the reservation that's accessible?
Total number of lakes accessible on the reservation. Accessible lakes, I do not know.
Highway accessible?
Yeah,
About 52.
52.
One more.
Beaver at one point, in some habitats are important for keeping moisture on the land, among other things. But they can also get in the way of managing tree population. Do you have an active program for dealing with beaver?
Usually we get a question on deer. First one I read.
These are guys with big teams.
We do have areas that are a problem. They do flood. They do flood some timber. They do kill some timber. I guess I only call it active program. We do put funds available for trapping, for trappers to remove beaver, X amount of beaver or much funding they can use each year. That's an annual funding. That's as far as our program that I know of that we do, unless Doug has anything to add to it.
Say, contract trappers heavily in the spring, mostly you don't concentrate enough year round. Most of the activities in the spring are contract trappers.
Yeah, the question on deer, so a lot of things we're doing, I'll touch on it quickly, is the deer population. They asked about deer, and I always answer it the same as we keep our deer in the freezer. So we hunt and kill deer. They're not an issue for us as far as regenerating. We're not regenerating our forest. We can do shelter wood cuts, we can plant trees. You know, off reservation, you've got tubes, you got fences, and we don't have that problem. So we can do that type of management because our deer population is probably where it should be.